Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and any other people who wish to describe themselves differently. I've got some domestic stuff to do, but let's kick off properly. Can I ask Katrina, who is the vicar, to lead us in a karakia to start the evening?
Tonight you may enjoy the wairua of this place. Lean into the shalom of the presence of all that is good from the past, the present and the future. Open yourself up to learning from each other and be guided by kindness. And ngā mihi nui amini.
Thank you. This is the boring part, but we do sort of need to do it. Okay, bathrooms are through the red door, and there's through that door, then through another door. If you end up in the boardroom, they are not the bathrooms, you've missed the toilets, so you go back. I'm assuming that we'll have a nice, safe evening this evening. If there is any reason to evacuate, then there are, in fact, all of these doors could be, you can get out straightforwardly, but we designated the fire exit and the main entrance as the main ways out. And the red door, if you go past the toilets this time, then you'll find exit doors there as well. So we will gather at the east end of the building by the grey buildings, about 50, 30 metres that way. Right, what else do I need to talk about? Can anybody wisely remind me of what else? Thank you. Those of you with smartphones will use a particular method of gathering questions. So you're going to hear stuff this evening which you're going to agree with, disagree with, whatever, the whole spectrum. If you've got a smartphone, if you can scan that and go to Slido and put the event number in, then you simply type your questions into your phone, and everybody does that. They're anonymous. It doesn't say, I don't know, Simon Watts typed this or something. And then when we get to the questions at the end, and you get the chance to vote on these questions. So if you see someone's question, you think, oh, that's a good question, you vote for it. And that impacts the order of the questions. And they're the questions we'll use at the end of the session to discuss. Okay, so I think I've done the housekeeping. Welcome. I'd like to especially thank the speakers. We have Bryce Davis. We have Paul Dalziel, and I do apologise. I have misrepresented Paul in the posters. He is, like all of us, his life has moved on, and the past posts that I put on the poster are no longer relevant. So Paul Dalziel is as you see him, and he's an economist for Wheel, and I'll leave that there. Also welcome to Robin from the Climate Change Commission. He's coming in via Teams, and he will be our first speaker this evening. The way the evening works is there are 3 speakers, and I'm not really a speaker. I'm doing a bit of conduit work as a 4th speaker. We then break for hot chocolate, and then we come back, and you've all put in lots and lots of questions on Slido, and then we have a question-answer session. Please ask whatever questions are in your mind, rather than think, oh, I can't possibly ask that. People will think, it doesn't matter what people think, and your name won't be on it anyway. So, okay, am I done? In which case, This evening is called The Role of Insurance in a Changing Climate. And I would like to hand over to the first speaker, who is the research manager, no, he's of the Climate Change Commission. And I don't know how this works. Can I step down? Okay. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Simon. I'm audible and visible, I take it? Great. Look, kia ora koutou. Thank you for having me for this interesting discussion this evening. I think it's a really pertinent and timely discussion. My name is Robin Campbell. I'm one of the general managers at the Climate Change Commission in Wellington, and I wish I could be there with you in person this evening, but that hasn't been possible, so it's great to be here online. And looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and also getting into the Q&A and discussing your questions, which you may have. I'm just going to pop up some slides. I am hoping you can see now some slides. Great, excellent. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is really talk about a recent piece of work we did at the Climate Change Commission, the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, which hopefully sort of sets the scene and for the following discussion about the impacts on the insurability of assets and so on that are increasingly being affected by climate change. Just to begin with, the Climate Change Commission has a particular role in the New Zealand system. We were established through the Zero Carbon Act reforms back in 2019, 2020. And really that role is to provide independent evidence-based advice to the government. It's a call and response model in the sense that the Commission advises, then the government decides, and then the Commission monitors implementation and effectiveness of what the government has decided to do. We cover both adaptation to the changing climate, but also emissions reduction, and we do give advice on the emissions trading scheme. We think of our role as providing independent advice to show what's happening, what's possible, and what's necessary. I suppose this past summer, well, it's feeling very wintry now in Wellington today, but over the past sort of 6 months or so, we really have seen how devastating climate-related hazards can be on people's lives across the country. There is increasing disruption from storms, from heavy rain, from landslides, from drought, and from sea level rise. 15 years ago, damaging storms happened about once a month, but now we see it's more like once a week. Climate change is certainly not a future issue. It is reshaping the hazards that we face today. It is increasing their frequency, their severity, and it is increasing their unpredictability. So this is not business as usual. Climate change is shifting what we think of as normal, and our systems need to adapt in response. The National Climate Change Risk Assessment, which the Commission published in April, or May rather, helps us focus as a country on where the risk is highest, where the impacts are greatest, so that we can prioritize coordinated action where it will make the biggest difference. The changing climate is such a big issue that it can be difficult to know where to start. And many communities, organizations, individuals have already made a start. But as a country, we feel that it helps to lay out the areas where action now will have the greatest payoff. Because by acting now, government, businesses, communities can strengthen resilience, better protect the things that we rely on every day. So the purpose of our risk assessment was it's set out in the legislation in the Climate Change Response Act, and it has two purposes. The first is to assess the current and future climate-related risks to New Zealand's economy, to our society, to the environment, to our ecology. And the second is to identify the most significant of those risks based on the nature of the risk, the severity, and the need for coordinated action. Now that we have delivered the report, the government has 2 years to respond with the next National Adaptation Plan. And that's the call and response framework that I talked about before. We outline the risks, the government comes up with a plan, and then we monitor how the plan's going. In total, in our assessment, there are 37 individual risks. 30 of those were assessed by us, 7 we contracted to independent researchers at formerly Manaaki Whenua for the distinct Ao Māori domain. Then we integrated that back into our main risk assessment. A quick word on what we mean by risk. So we follow the definition of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of climate risk being the potential for adverse consequences to human and ecological systems. So that's made up of the hazard, the physical effect or trend caused by climate change, a flood, sea level rise, increasing heat. Exposure, who or what is exposed to the hazard. And vulnerability, the factors that determine the nature and extent of the impact of that hazard on who is exposed, who or what is exposed to it. We drew on a broad range of evidence over at least a year, both qualitative and quantitative, from desk-based research to visits to communities around the country where we heard from people about how climate change is impacting them, what they're doing about it. But ultimately, the risk assessment does rely on expert judgment, which from experts here in Aotearoa, New Zealand and internationally, about how to rate these risks. What we found of the 37 was that there were 10 areas that we feel are the most significant risks. And that's because these are the risk areas that are either already seriously affecting people or that will soon and will take time to prepare for, and therefore action is needed now. They are the risk areas where acting soon can have the biggest influence on many other risks as well, because risks work in a cascading chain often, where if you address one thing, you can reduce risks further down the chain. We grouped these 10 most significant risks into 4 categories: key infrastructure, communities and safety, nature and the bioeconomy, and decisions and funding. Many of them relate to the systems that support quality of life and economic resilience, like roads and railways, like drinking water, like natural resources. An effective adaptation to reduce those risks will depend on strengthening the country's underpinning structures and tools, such as funding and financing systems, trust in democratic institutions, social connections, and well-being. We think the list is robust and well-balanced. There's a strong but not total correlation with the previous risk assessment done 6 years ago. And I'll go into some of these priority risk areas now. So for risks to water infrastructure, it will come as no surprise to anyone really that at a national level, our water infrastructure is already under strain. Climate change is putting and will continue to put increasing pressure on every part of the water system. Reforms are underway in water infrastructure, and they are a real opportunity to embed resilience. If that opportunity is not grasped, then risks to water infrastructure by our assessment will be the first area to reach extreme risk level within the next 25 years. The second infrastructure area is risks to buildings. Buildings across Aotearoa are exposed to a range of climate-related hazards from heat to flooding, which threaten both their structure and whether they can still be used. This increases insurance issues, very pertinent to tonight's discussion, and increases challenges with communities potentially being displaced. Thirdly, risks to road and rail networks. Climate hazards are putting increasing pressure on the country's road and rail networks, causing both short-term and lasting damage. One of the reasons this area rose into our significant risk categorization is the importance of transport networks to keep communities and the economy connected and goods moving. In many parts of the country, when a road goes down, you lose access to emergency services, you lose access to supply chains for food and medicine, you can't get your locally made goods out, you can't get things in, and so that helps us see why these are priority areas for resilience. When they're hit, transport networks affect communities and the wider economy. For risks to social and community well-being, there are increasing impacts on people's well-being because of climate change, particularly to mental health and social cohesion. This is something where there is good research on, but there is also when my colleagues at the Commission travel around the country and talk to areas that have experienced recent climate-related storms and so on, this really comes to the fore. The concept of rain anxiety. And the feeling when your community has been hit several times by natural hazards, the anxiety about when that's going to happen again. The human and financial costs are high, and there is little in place to prevent distress and uncertainty from climate change impacts in many communities. Another priority area for us is risks to the emergency management system. The country's emergency management system is under huge pressure. And may struggle to respond to the increasing frequency, severity, and extent of disasters that can result from climate hazards. This, like water infrastructure, is another area where there is active reform. That reform is a huge opportunity to make our systems fit for the future that we know that is coming at us. I think particularly since Cyclone Gabrielle a couple of years ago, improvements have already been made, and we are seeing improvements in the emergency management system. We need to keep going with those. Ngā mea hira hira o te ao Māori is risks in the Māori world, and our assessment finds that climate change will impact Māori in distinct ways, from cultural practices to health and well-being to legal rights. Long-standing factors such as land marginalisation and alienation make these impacts worse and reduce options for adapting. The final set of significant risks include risks to ecosystems and biodiversity. Climate change is increasing the pressure on our rivers, forests, coasts, and oceans, the native plants and animals that keep them healthy. And when these natural systems are under pressure, the effects are felt across our communities and economy. We also looked at sectors of the economy that rely on the natural environment, things like agriculture, horticulture, forestry, fisheries, tourism. And of those areas, forestry showed the highest level of risk. Climate-related impacts from extreme weather, drought, and wildfire, through to new pests and diseases, affect our managed production forests. This not only threatens the economy, but also the communities downstream from those forests, and creates a risk to meeting New Zealand's emissions reduction targets because of the role of forestry in offsetting carbon emissions. That comes into play here as well. In this decisions and funding area, we highlight risks to central and local government funding and risks to decision-making and delivery. As climate impacts intensify, central and local government face higher costs for disaster response, for infrastructure repair, for welfare and health services, and for resilience investments and adaptation. There is currently no direction really on cost sharing, who needs to be paying for what, and there is a lack of investment as a result. This pushes costs down the road. And then there are risks to decision-making and delivery itself. Climate hazards intensify, the country gets caught up in increasing successive urgent responses that make decision-making and delivery more complex. Many of our structures are not set up to grapple with decisions like managed retreat and the trade-offs and the decisions some communities are already facing. Quickly, risks to the insurability of assets. This is a risk category that we looked at. It did not come up as one of the most significant risks. And I think one of the key things I want to say about this is that the major driver of the risks to insurability of assets is the underlying risks to the assets themselves. The more we do to adapt our towns and cities and the rest of the country to the changing climate, the lower the risk to the insurability of assets will be. We assessed it to be moderate now, with no further action, rising to major in 2050, major in 2090, or extreme in 2090 under a higher warming scenario. We did find that there are gaps in the policy response. The government's approach to insurability of assets at the moment really focuses on getting better information, but has not yet moved to grapple with what to do if insurance withdrawal becomes widespread, or who is even responsible for that. So that is all a rather bleak picture. And I'm sorry to start with that. But however, I think it is really important to stress that we do know enough about what to expect, that we can take action now in a low regrets or no regrets way. Scientific understanding is growing. There will always be some uncertainty, but we do know directionally what we need to do. We can be in a good position to prepare for what we know is coming, and we hope at the Commission that our risk assessment is a tool to help that happen. So in summary, the risk assessment does set out the priorities for decision makers and businesses and communities to act on. It is intended to show where planning and investment can make the biggest difference. We do face serious risks on our water systems, on our homes, on our roads, on our emergency services, and so on. But acting sooner rather than later to address those risks will minimize the cost. Yes, we'll minimize the cost is basically the key message there. And finally, I think there is a lot we need to do around resilience and adaptation, but the ultimate way to reduce the risk of the changing climate is to contribute to the global effort to slow climate change, to reduce our emissions. That will mean that the issues we need to deal with in future decades are less intense than if we do not get global climate change under control. So yeah, apologies again for the somewhat bleak start, but I do want to stress that the message there that we do know enough to get going. There is some good work happening already, and in many cases it is a case of bringing stuff together, ramping it up, moving faster, and I think that needs to happen at the central government level, local government. Communities are already driving some great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin, and you'll be staying with us through the next thing to the Q&A. Very interesting.
I will, yes.
For the rest of us, Slido is there. If you're writing questions down, great. There'll be time a bit later to get them into Slido so that we can go that way. Anyhow, thank you again. It's time for our second speaker, and it was a great pleasure to introduce Bryce Davis. He's helped us in one of these events before, but all yours. You have about 15 minutes.
Okay. If that was a bleak start, it's now going to get exciting because we're talking about insurance. Okay. I'm going to play this reasonably straight. The topic is what's the role of insurance, so I thought I might answer that. I'll give a little bit of context first, just so you understand where I'm coming from, then talk about the role of insurance in a kind of more general sense, and then some of the more specific things that you can hope to see, you should expect to see coming from insurers in terms of a contribution. The first thing to say is that I'm going to talk about the consequences of climate change. right? So this is about the adaptation, it's about reducing risk. I'm not going to talk about emissions reduction. I'm not going to talk about the transition to a low carbon economy. We have a role in that, but that's a whole other set of topics. Climate risk and kind of natural hazard risk exists on a number of levels for insurers. From, I guess, a very strategic set of issues to very operational sorts of issues. And I'm primarily going to talk about what we would call insurance risk, i.e. the risk that we can't profitably insure people, right? So it's all this kind of availability, affordability type issues. I'm going to be talking about things in and around that, which I'm sure is more interesting than me talking about a strategic or an operational risk. The key thing to say from my perspective is when we think about climate change, we don't see that as creating a new set of risks. All the impacts that climate change is going to have is on things that we already face. It's going to increase rainfall, wind patterns are going to change, oceans are going to get warmer, tropical cyclones are coming further south, coastal inundation, riverine flooding, all those sorts of things. They all exist today. They're all insured today. And so all we're saying is that some of those things, although they might be large today, are going to grow. Think flooding. Some of those things which are small today, think coastal inundation, are going to grow a lot. Right? So it's an exacerbator of existing risks. So it's not necessarily new. It's about matching the pace and scale of change and understanding the kind of the cascading and kind of compounding risks that get created. Obviously, that then flows into other things that we need to think about as an insurer, right? It does have operational kind of considerations. If the risk is changing, we need to understand that. So, the data we have, the models we have, how we think about what we price and all that sort of stuff, that flows out of that, as well as more strategic considerations like, are we interested in insuring that at all? Is this a reasonable market to be in? But it all stems from understanding the risk and thinking about what our response to that changing risk is. And in thinking about that, there are some fundamentals that we will come up against. Things that make a risk insurable. There's like a list of them, there's like 7 things that we kind of look at, but we can't avoid those. The most obvious one is we insure risks, not certainties. So if the risk is absolutely going to happen, we're not going to insure that because that's just us. If we were to price that, that would be if your someone's shoulder was $500,000 and it was guaranteed to fall over tomorrow, then I guess what your premium is going to be? It's going to be $500,000, right? So certainty becomes really important. The scale becomes very important. The ability to pin down loss and cause is very important. So some things that are really fundamental to our ability to insure. And then there are things that are really important to our willingness to insure. Can we get the capital? Will reinsurers want to support us? Can it be profitable? Will we get investors to kind of support it? Do we have the knowledge and the skills to actually even make the choices? All those things become important considerations. My focus is really talking about the kind of short term. I'm talking probably about up to 2050. Once we start to get beyond that, things get a bit gnarly and a bit uncertain, and there are no promises. But you wouldn't expect promises from me. And the other thing to think about is what we think about as insurers. We think about a thing called residual risk, right? So if you take an idea of flooding, we sit there and go, there's a river here, it rains, flood, stormwater is going to come here. We expect that there are stormwater systems and that they will have a level of service that they'll provide a community. There will be flood walls. There's a level of service that they will provide a community. And what we are effectively doing in pricing a risk and offering you a premium is thinking about, given that they're going to work, what could happen? What's left over that we need to price for? Because the assumption is that the stormwaters will be well maintained. They will work to the design, and so will flood defences. So it's a residual risk view. So that's just a whole bunch of context and background, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of where we're coming from. So what is the role of insurance? Well, you won't be surprised to know that it is to insure people and pay claims. right? That doesn't change under climate change. That's our job. That's how we make money. That's the business we're in. We don't make money if we don't insure people. We don't keep our customers if we don't pay claims. So it's in some sense, it's pretty simple, despite what some people might think, in terms of our willingness and wanting to pay claims and all that sort of stuff. Why is that really important? So that's kind of the basics of what we do. And there's lots of technical stuff that goes into our ability to do it, but we offer you insurance, we pay your claims. Why do we want to do that? Well, for New Zealand, that's a really important thing. It creates a whole bunch of really important economic and social benefits. And the reason people get concerned about the loss of insurance, it's about the loss of all those important things that insurance creates. The first one is to kind of think of us as, I guess, a shock absorber, right? We fund recovery, right? Something bad happens, we get to pay the repair bill. That's the most primary thing people think about insurance doing. Certainly that's what government likes us to do. It means they don't have to pay. And because the money's there, it accelerates recovery. And there's lots of really good research that says the more insurance you have, the quicker recoveries are, the better it is for people, better it is for mental health, for the economy, a whole bunch of things, right? So that's a really good thing to do, and we want to maintain that. The thing that people are also starting to realise more and more with the prospect that that won't be there is that there's another really important role that we play, which is about economic growth and development. Would you be confident to buy a home if you couldn't insure it? Would you be confident to export goods if you couldn't insure them while they're travelling to the market? Plant and equipment in your business, right? So this kind of ability to have confidence and invest in trade and the economic activity we create by employing plumbers and builders and panel beaters and all that sort of stuff. That's a really important thing that we do. We allow risks to be managed a bit more efficiently. Probably two key things there that we'd often point to. One is that what that premium we ask you to pay is telling you is whether you have big risks or not. We call that risk signalling. In theory, that informs you. I'm not quite sure how good a job that we actually does, and you can tell me during the break. But in theory, a lot of people say that's a really good thing. It's part of the information people need to understand to know that they need to make different choices. And the other thing we do is that we essentially bundle up all that risk and share it out amongst everyone, including people overseas, through the insurance that we buy, which is reinsurance. So the people who get to pay for our earthquakes are Canadian pension funds and Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway and all those sorts of people. And that's a much more efficient thing, a much more effective thing for New Zealand to do. And then there's the fourth thing, which is more psychosocial, and you might scoff, but there's a sense that what we do is we provide people with security, well-being, and a sense of self-reliance. It's that knowing there's a safety net, right? You can go off and you can invest, you can take risks, knowing that actually there's an ability to recover. That when the worst does happen, actually you're not beholden on anyone to help you get on your feet. We're there to help you. So that's another really important thing. That's the general thing, right? That's what insuring people and paying claims does. What you should want and expect from insurers as climate change rolls out is that we keep doing that. Now, there's more specific things that we need to do that help contribute to us being able to keep doing that. And that kind of exists at three levels for me. One is there's a role that we have engaging with central government. And we issued a report yesterday that's kind of part of that process, which is we have a view about how risks need to be managed. It's beholden on us to kind of share that and advocate on behalf of ourselves, of our customers, of the communities we kind of serve to ensure that risks are well managed. One of the fundamental things, as we said at the beginning, that's important to the provision of insurance is that there are risks that are well managed. They are not certainties, they are not catastrophic. We do understand them, right? Government creates the enabling environment for that to occur. And at the moment, that enabling environment is not fit for purpose. And it's not going to cope with the changes that are coming. So we need to improve that. So one of the really important roles that we have is an advocacy role with government. We take that seriously. We've got lots of plans in that space, but that's something you should expect essentially insurers to play a part in solving this. There's very specific things I can list out there. You know, national guidance, understanding which locations are really at risk and which ones aren't, understanding the costs and benefits so that we can make informed choices about policy and investment. They're all things that we can do to support government and conversations that we are having with them. Second level is actually with councils and communities directly. And again, it's an alignment, information sharing, it's a partnership type role, really, that we should be trying to play. Because if you think about it, managing these risks is essentially a four-legged stool: government, local government, business and communities, right? We've all got to play our part, and so again, it's about insurers playing their part with local communities through their regional and district councils. One of the really important things is actually understanding the risk from the community's point of view or from the council's point of view. We have a view of risk, councils have a different view of risk. Often their view of risk is more granular. That's very useful. It's useful if we are reflecting that, if we can incorporate that into our choices and decisions. So data sharing becomes a very, very important thing. Helping them understand the choices that we're making. What do we find acceptable as a level of risk and unacceptable? Because they are making choices around zoning and consenting that are going to last for a very, very long time. We're making a choice about a 1-year contract. So there's ample room for those two views to diverge and to leave parts of communities high and dry. So making sure that we're on the same page about what is an acceptable risk or not is a very, very important thing. Do we know how to do that? Not yet. It's really hard because it's commercially sensitive and there's competition issues, but it's something we need to lean into to solve. Participating in plan reforms, spatial planning that's coming up, we need to be involved in that. Understanding what councils are doing to reduce risk, really, really important. Lots of things to do there. And then finally at the third level, there's our customers. Supporting them to make decisions. It's one thing to send them a rather blunt message through a premium. It's probably another thing to actually explain why we've made it that cost. What are we actually seeing? What risks are we think you're exposed to? What do we think you could do about that? There's an education role that we need to play. There's some flexibility we need to provide people when things go wrong and they're wanting to rebuild and they want to rebuild somewhere else, right? We need to be able to support alternative decisions, right? So that's another thing we should be doing. And then there's the inevitable kind of question about continuing insurance provision. At some point, risks will get so great that it doesn't make any sense to insure them, right? The risks get so great that, quite frankly, you should not be living there. It's as simple as that. It's a small number of properties at the moment. It will grow, but there's going to be some for whom it's going to be really, really expensive. It's inevitable. But there are things that will happen to hopefully fix that. We'll either move people into safer locations through whatever you want to call it, managed retreat or strategic relocation, whatever your favourite description of it is, or whilst either the property owner or the council actually reduces the risk, right? We need to stick around while that happens. Now, that will be possible if we act early. It will get hard if we don't. But thinking about how we do that, and you know, for example, Matata up in by Plenty Hawke's Bay, they had a managed retreat process. That was very interesting for us to kind of wrap around. Like, how do we think about that? How do we support customers, continue to insure them while they get slowly bought out? Things like that we need to kind of work through. So anyway, that's me. I've probably gone on for a lot longer than 15. I do bang on. No, that's good? Okay, I'll leave it there. So, look, what I say there, it's all about the risk, right? There are other factors that play. Let me just say this. When you think about your premium, there are more things going on than just risk, right? So we can talk about that in questions and other things. But for the purposes of climate change and natural hazards, it's about the risk, and we're responding to that. So whilst we can talk about issues with insurance, that's the symptom of an underlying problem, right? We probably need to do something about the insurance, but we sure as hell have to do something about the underlying risk. And a lot of what the role of insurance is is continue to protect you against that risk, but also helping that risk to be better managed. That's what the role you should expect from us is. I'll leave it there. Look forward to your questions.
I'm going to talk for a few moments to give you time to get those questions in, because there's a lot of questions there. Okay. Thank you, Bryce. Really interesting. Our third speaker is waiting in the wings. Paul Dalzell, please, welcome.
So thank you very much for the invitation to talk. We started with that lovely karakia, but I like to give my own little mihi to a gathering like this. So inga rangatira mai e tau nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tino nui taku mihi o araha kia koutou I tēnei pō. Kei te mihi ahau ki ngā tonga katoa o Kaitahu, takata whenua o tēnei rohi. Ka iti taku mōhio ki te reo Māori, engari kei te mihi ahau ki tēnei tonga o enei motu. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. So I've acknowledged you and I've acknowledged the tangata whenua of this place. I've acknowledged that my knowledge of te reo is small, but I honour this treasure of these islands. And then I finished with a phrase that people have been saying to groups like this in this place for 800 years. And it says literally, this is you, may you and I, all of us together, enjoy well-being. And that's the context within which I'm going to talk tonight about the role of insurance in climate change. So yes, I did used to be a professor. The good professors become distinguished professors. I became an extinguished professor. So I retired, and so now I'm not allowed to use that title. I'm Paul Dalzell, and I'm research economist for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And basically we think about how do we design our economic systems, including our insurance systems, in a way that promotes the well-being of people and planet. So climate change, essentially, we think a lot about climate change at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. Think of it as a bathtub. So we are releasing carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, methane into the atmosphere, and that happens naturally anyway. And some of it goes into the atmosphere and it comes out of the atmosphere, and this natural carbon cycle, this has been going on for as long as the planet has been going on. But human activity and the expansion of the economy past the Industrial Revolution means a new tap has been opened up that is releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, filling up the bathtub at a faster rate. And we are finding new ways to take carbon out of the atmosphere, but relatively uncertain at this stage. Things that we are trialling, particularly the scientists. So the climate crisis has come about because of this additional fossil-fueled outflow of carbon into the atmosphere is causing global heating that is changing the way the climate behaves. So this is a slide from a presentation that was made to Treasury at the end of last year from a chief economist at the European Central Bank. And it just shows how the temperature, people say, it's a cold day today, what happened to the global warming? If you look at the distribution of temperatures over a decade, the distribution is shifting right. We are getting hotter. There's about a 1% increase in the average temperature in those distributions over the last 30 years. So her summary statement, climate change is no longer an issue of the distant future. We are experiencing it now. Our children and our children's children will experience it at an accelerating rate. And so this has consequences. This is the NIWA, one of our science institutions that is monitoring the impact, and it talks about the way when the climate was different, it was perfectly sensible to build communities on the coastline. Really great places to build. But as the climate changes, as those sea surges increase in frequency and intensity, and as the sand gets dragged out into the ocean, exposing what's left behind, then the risk, exactly as we've just heard Bryce talking about, the risk rises and rises. And so we start thinking about what does it mean to insure those properties when the risks are increasing as a result of these weather events. So here's a picture of Christchurch just 4 years ago next month. You know, an example of a sudden extreme weather event causing widespread flooding on a scale that we wouldn't normally expect in this part of Shirley. In fact, this is where Jane, my spouse, she grew up in that neighbourhood. Nothing like that in her childhood. Now this is just 6 years ago. So what does insurance do in that context? So let me start with the obvious point that insurance is a way that communities share risks among themselves. And we have specialists, IAG, that operate to do this on our behalf, but essentially it is ourselves sharing the risks among ourselves in order to promote well-being. And so two things have to be there for an insurance program to work. And the first is, if a bad event does happen, then it's a small number of households or businesses that will experience a large loss. If everybody experiences a large loss, then there's no possibility for insurance. Insurance only works if the large losses happen to only a few people in the scheme. And secondly, no one knows in advance who those households or businesses will be. That's what we need to set up an insurance scheme. So let me show you a picture. This is just made up. This is my imagination. But it says, let's think of 100 households who are entering this insurance scheme. And the insurance scheme is against, say, a flooding event, if the extreme weather event occurs. And if the storm does arrive, then one house has to be totally rebuilt. And it can't be rebuilt in the same place. So the land on which it has been built is no longer suitable for building. So that household has lost $1 million. And then a neighbouring house, you could still build on it, but you've got to start from scratch. So that's $750,000. The neighbour on the other side again, $500,000, and so on. But by the time the top 10 damaged houses have been accounted for everybody else, this is just really a blip. And in fact, the damage is so small, it might even not cover the no claims bonus. This is why you have no claims bonuses, because the insurance company doesn't want to deal with these. It's more efficient to let them look after themselves. The reason we enter into the insurance scheme is because we don't want to be this household that's lost the whole value of our property. And if I do an average cost, it's only $33,000, not the $1 million. And if the storm event happens only once in every 100 years, then a fair premium might be $350 per annum. Okay, I've added a little bit more because it costs money to pay out these claims and all the rest of it, and we've got to pay salaries of good people. And so for $350 per year, I am protecting myself against the risk of losing $1 million if the house and the land it's on can no longer be used for residential building. And that's why I enter the scheme. If we know what that one house is, then there's no point in entering the scheme if I'm absolutely certain I'm going to be down here. So these are the things that we need to set up an insurance scheme. Okay, now the climate changes. And where we built those 100 houses is no longer a good place to build houses. So we are getting weather events that are more extreme, so there's more water coming out of the sky during the storm, and they happen more often. So what happens to the way insurance works? The first thing is the idea that only a few households will be affected may no longer hold. It may be the whole suburb is going to be inundated, and it's not just one house that's going to have to be rebuilt and the land used for something else. It might be a whole lot more. And secondly, once in 100 years might become once every 20 years, say. Now, let's look at the graph. That's the way it was. So now, 3 times the damage, let's say, if we have a big storm. So 3 houses you can no longer build on the property. Another 3 houses that have to be totally built from scratch on the same place, etc., etc., etc. Now we're down to about 25 houses, even 30 houses, before the insurance company isn't paying out anymore. So it's had a big impact. And now if that cost on average is calculated, it's not 33,000, it's 93,000, because the climate has changed. And if that happens not once every 100 years, but every 20 years, then the fair premium to enter into this scheme is $5,000 per annum. Now, I'm making these numbers up, but the underlying physics of what you need to set up an insurance scheme is valid. In this case, the premium has gone up from $350 to $5,000 per annum. And it's not because the insurance company has changed. It's because the climate has changed. And so the risks have changed. And so sharing those risks amongst the community means everybody has to pay more. And this is one of the big puzzles about all of this, is that there's 100 private households affected by this, but the solution requires a community response. And so how do you negotiate a community response to save 100 private households this increase in the premium? This is where the politics gets really messy at the moment. Those debates that we're talking about, the reason we set up an independent climate change commission is to try and help us navigate through finding community responses to what is essentially a private household problem. Final thing I want to say. The second feature needed to make insurance work is that no one knows in advance who the flooded households or businesses will be. But if these events are happening not once in every 100 years, but once in every 20 years, and as we get better at modelling floodplains in cities like Christchurch, it becomes obvious who's going to be wiped out in the next big flood. And when that happens, when it becomes obvious that it's going to be that suburb and that part of the suburb and that street in that part of the suburb and those 6 houses at the end of that street in that part of the suburb, then those houses become uninsurable. This is another slide from that presentation to Treasury from the European Central Bank. In Europe already, only 25% of climate-related catastrophe losses are covered by insurance in Europe. And their concern is that that protection gap could widen as premiums go up. And so again, we are left to how do we come together as communities to invest in climate adaptation, climate mitigation, when the benefits go to the private households. That's the difficulty we have as a community and always have. So there we go, more things to worry about. But let's stop now for a cup of tea and then we'll answer your questions after the break.
I feel so cheerful. Now, hang on a moment. Sorry, I don't know where we are. Ah, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I'm not a speaker here this evening, in the sense that the speakers we have had are speaking from their own expertise. Yes, I do have that nasty P title, but I'm not talking from that basis of expertise. All I'm doing is acting as a conduit, I suppose. And I should share some context. So basically, the Brighton Observatory is a community organisation, and we're based at the back there, and very grateful we are too to be based there. We are dealing with, it's difficult to count, between 5 and 7 different communities, and we maintain confidentiality with them. So I'm not going to say, oh, we're talking to this community or that community, or they said, unless they choose, those communities choose to share that, or we won't. And in one sense, that extends to community representatives here. All I'm going to do now, I know it's here somewhere, yes. All I'm going to do now is very briefly give some context for the communities in this area in terms of the impact of climate change. This is very boring. Oh, actually, no, it doesn't work on that, does it? Excellent. I can't see the screens from here, so. Okay. So I'm going to be very short, and I've already talked about this. I'd like to think about the added impact of climate change on the communities around here. Now, to do that, I'm going to be very brief. You can't do it unless you think about our immediate history, which is the earthquake. And some random facts about what that event, or those series of events, actually was, and the impact on those communities. And coming back to both the previous presentations, the Christchurch earthquakes, 22 billion in private insurance paid out, about. That's a lot of money to pay out. And we have the red zones, many houses, many people displaced, many houses damaged to a greater or lesser degree. And New Zealand as a whole, we've got about 400,000 houses in flood zones of one form or another. And Canterbury and Christchurch both have quite high exposure to those risks. What can I say? The emergency response during the earthquakes was incredibly good. The response since the earthquakes has been much more uneven. Right. Now, this is short because I'm going to talk only about 2 things. When we first took up residence here, people used to come in and say, oh, are you the church? And we actually shuffled those persons to the next building along. Now it's changed. Now people come and say, oh, are you the observatory? So, result, that's good. Well, And I'll share something with you. We tried to work backwards here, and we think it was about last August that the first person came in quite a distraught state, worried about the impact of climate change on their house. A long time ago, I was a qualified and accredited counsellor. I'm not now, I don't wish to be. And in the observatory, we don't have the skill sets. I can still recognise stuff. My training hasn't died or been forgotten. But it's really not what we want to be doing. When it got to 3 or 4 a week, we actually went to the health centre in Brighton, and we have an arrangement with them now that they have counsellors on board pretty much all the time, and we can refer people to them. But let's just step back a bit. 3 or 4 people a week is a lot of people being, I won't say overwhelmed, because that sounds like I'm being a drama queen, but certainly carrying with them worry and panic about usually their primary assets or their family. And that's one thing I want to share, that it's almost certainly cumulative based on the earthquakes and what's happened since. But we are an affected area. And that stress is cumulative, and we're beginning to see it. The second thing, and you'll be glad to know that it's nothing to do with your company, people call me sometimes and say, my insurance policy has done this. And so I sit and talk a little bit and work out what's happening. And a particular company, bless them, this client, they told this client that actually their policy was doubling because there was going to be a 7-metre sea surge in the Avon Heathcote estuary. Anyway, I phoned the company up, as I do quite often. And one interesting thing is you always come up against, obviously the data the insurance company uses is actually private data, and actually it's commercially sensitive as well. So being an academic, I never get my hands on the data. Anyway, I spoke to them and explained that actually it was pretty much a physical and hydrological impossibility. There isn't enough water in the estuary to get a 7-metre sea surge. And in the end, there was some backwards and forwards, and they said, oh no, it wasn't, it was something else. And that's quite light-hearted. But we do get a lot of people talking about insurance, and funnily, I find myself saying, well, it's probably about the risk. And such like. I think we need to think quite carefully about how we handle this, because it's going to be change. But if it's done right, it's not panic. And if it's done right, nobody gets left behind. Now, that's going to mean changes as to how we do things and think about them. But anyhow, I don't think there's an answer yet. People always come in here and they say, well, what's going to happen? What's the plan? And I get my crystal ball out and stuff. Not. I think I keep getting questions that I have no answers to. And I think it refers back to both of the previous presentations, that we are individually and as a nation and a region struggling with a changed reality, and a reality which is going to continue to change. Now, BOEE is not political, and I'm not going to be political as an individual here. But the only thing I'm really sure about, I can't answer those questions I get asked, but unless we do have a framework between central government, communities, local government, banks, insurers. If we don't get that sorted in some way or another, we're going to have a major national problem, I think, which could permanently change our country. Anyway, I'm getting far too heavy, and I've also taken too much time. A series of questions that I would appreciate engaging, and these haven't just come from me. No, my ESP isn't working. Okay. A series of questions that I think about are questions like these. And I didn't actually write these questions, somebody else wrote them. But actually, I get questions like this quite a lot. And I think that answering these type of questions might help communities because it begins to bring back a little bit of certainty and to know where we're aiming for. Okay. That's it. I think now we are not going to grab a large measure of scotch. Instead, you're welcome. We have hot chocolate and biscuits. And then the three speakers, of which I'm not one, will gather and become part of the panel to answer questions from Slido. Thank you. Is this live? Yes, okay. Okay, so welcome back, Robin. So you can imagine Robin is sitting at that table as part of the panel. Okay, so the first question is, Council puts erosion on our limbs, insurers deny cover in this region. We have 40 metres of seaward dune growth. How can this happen, and what can you do to fix it? That sounds like an impossible question. Over to you anyway.
Okay, there's a number of things to say about that. The first thing to comment on is insurers react to different things being on your limbs in different ways. So erosion is one of those things where the loss can be quite catastrophic, right? It's like landslip. It's you're there or that you're not, right? And things like coastal erosion or cliff collapse and stuff like that can not occur, then you've lost 10 metres, right? So it's a kind of an all or nothing thing. So insurers find that difficult to price. What is the potential? Because the way that we described the pricing of insurance earlier on is pretty much it. It's just a lot more factors and a lot more complicated than that, but it's fundamentally that's it, right? So we find it very difficult to price. So therefore, when it's difficult to price and it looks like a binary all or nothing, we just say no, right? That's the easiest way for an insurer to deal with it. So that's why something like erosion gets that kind of response. Now, the challenge is that the information that we have is different from what the councils have, and it will be different from your actual experience, right? And so what insurers do and need to probably do a better job at is being able to react to that new information that you provide. So we'll have a view, our models will have a view, and those models are not perfect, and there'll be more granular information that we could take on board. So there needs to be processes in which we can actually go, thanks, give us the information. If we agree with that information, we can actually change that. In our system, it won't change what's on your limb, but we can respond to it differently. So there's a couple of things going on there. Hopefully that explains things.
Thank you very much. Paul?
And adding to that point, placing that question into its historical context, which is 100 years where city planning has allowed and even encouraged communities to build residential areas where they are today, because in those days we had no imagination of climate change, and why would we? And so the question asked, what can you do to fix it? And I would say that question has to change to, what can we do to fix it? And this is what we are really struggling with, where our history has been, this is a private responsibility for an individual household to negotiate with their insurers, whereas we require a community response saying, this is what the legacy of our history is. How do we help people in this place to sustain well-being in a way where nobody is overburdened with what that means? And it means some people are going to have to be generous, higher taxes, higher levies, maybe a capital gains tax where the proceeds goes directly into managed retreat, you know, because it's a tax on assets to protect people whose assets are now under threat. So all of those sorts of conversations are part of the answer to that question, but at the moment we are not asking those questions because we are burying our head in those sand dunes, saying if we ignore it for long enough, the problem will go away. And all we are doing is imposing higher costs on our children and our children's children when we do that.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, thanks. I think the only thing I would add to that is that I do empathise with the situation of anyone who's in a situation like that. And it really shows the limitations of data. More data is useful for understanding what we're up against and what we're facing, but providing data without corresponding information about what can be done leaves people and can leave people in a fairly helpless position. So yes, we should be investing in improving our data. Bryce has highlighted some of the issues around sharing data, and different sets of data that might show different things. But equally important is investing our collective thinking in what can be done as we better understand what the risks are.
Thank you. Okay. I'm happy to go on to the next question. And I realise, I do apologise, somebody told to me I never introduced myself. My name is Simon Watts. I'm the director of the observatory. I think most of you know me anyway, but I've done it now. So the second question, if as we have heard, the insurance will become... Oh, hang on. Sorry, it's not the question. Why are we having to face insurance increases now for something that may be decades away? Gentlemen.
You're not. It's a simple answer. We write a one-year contract, and if you think about what Paul was showing earlier on with, you know, here's an event, what's the likely impact event, what kind of level of damage, you know, we do that on a 1 in 10 year event, 5-year event, 20, 50, 100, 255. We run those calculations all the time for all different types of properties. It's a big maths calculation that is essentially asking the question, what costs do we expect to have to pay for the damage to your property that could occur over the next year? It's a 1 year view, because it's a 1 year contract. So you're paying for expected loss this year. Not next year, not the year after. We'll figure that out next year. And that's what your premium next year, well, it's part of what your premium next year is actually reflecting.
So just in relation to that, why can't some people insure their properties now?
There's, well, that's an individual situation. I'd basically say there are a number of reasons why people do not insure their property or cannot insure their property. Most of it is about the price. It has always been the case that the reason people don't have insurance is because they say they can't afford it. That has always been the main reason. Continues to be the main reason, right? And why is that? That was the case when the average home premium was about $400. People couldn't afford it because of price. It's now the reason why people can't afford it when the average premium is about $1,700, $1,800. There might be more people, but there's a basic kind of income issue there. So that's one reason. The other reason why people can't insure their homes will be because one of the risks there that they're exposed to is, by the insurer's appetite for it, uninsurable. Now, different insurers will have a different view about what uninsurable means for them. Some insurers are more aggressive with that and less inclined. If it gets slightly too risky for them, it's in their interest to say no, and so they say no. Others, we prefer to try and say yes, but you're going to get insurers all over the spectrum on that. So it's probably either the level of risk or the income of the household. And on very, very small occasions, there are something about the individual, right? We tend not to insure convicted arsons, for example, right? Or people who have defrauded us, right? So there's a moral kind of hazard issue about some of the individuals. That's why. But it is fundamentally a price issue, fundamentally an income issue. Some people just haven't got around to it. That's usually a small line item. It's, oh yeah, I should do that, and they haven't got there. But it is fundamentally an affordability thing.
Thank you. Paul?
No,
Robin? Would you like to comment?
No, I wouldn't add anything on the last one.
Okay. I realise I did a bad thing. I just gave the microphone, which is not my role. So stay in my lane. You can add questions into Slido whilst we're talking. Okay? Right. The next question is, if, as we have heard, the insurance will become too high and too many houses will be affected to be covered by an individual insurance, should we have national cover? I'm assuming we're talking about public insurance alongside private insurance. I don't know whose question that was. Was that the intention? Anyway, okay. Over to you, panel, I think.
Well, I could start. That has been a common response in about half the countries in Europe, that people have bought houses or built houses in good faith in accordance with zoning conditions of their local council at a time when we did not understand the risks that were accumulating as a result of the greenhouse gas emissions from increased population and economic activity. If it reaches a point where a particular area, it usually is, can no longer make private arrangements because the risks have reached such a high point that private insurance companies are unable to provide risk sharing amongst the community because the whole community is impacted, then the government adopting a long-term intergenerational view and also acting partly in response to the decisions it made 25 years ago to allow those houses to be built, etc., has responded by creating a scheme where the response is socialised, if you like, is a common response rather than individual private responses is the way forward. Now, it's not every country in Europe, and the schemes differ. Jonathan Boston has just published a book in which he's talked through some of these issues. He is a distinguished professor at Victoria University. So that is definitely on the cards, that it's not something that individuals should be left to try and do the best they can, because some individuals will not be able to do very much. And they have done nothing wrong to find themselves in the situation where they are. And so in this country, I think collectively we have tended to respond with compassion in this sort of situation. But at the moment, we are struggling to find the mechanisms for having those conversations, where the Climate Change Commission is one of the bright lights on that spectrum. And you know, I'm very grateful to Robin and his colleagues for the work they are doing.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. I guess I'd add that, yeah, Paul's correct. There are a number of public insurance schemes around the world in different countries. Different countries have made different choices about that, and we could adopt more of that in New Zealand. There are, unfortunately, I betray my training as a policy analyst here. It is about, you know, what you want to achieve and what trade-offs you want to make with your intervention there. So, you know, public insurance, somebody still pays when things need fixing. So it's about who pays and how do we design a system with that. There is, you know, equally, I think it's worth seriously considering whether, if we're having a discussion about is there a public insurance answer to this issue, whether there's a subsidized private insurance answer to this issue. That's another way you can intervene with collective money. But those are symptomatic, right? The underlying issue is that we continue to build things in risky places in risky ways. So number one is, let's stop doing that. Number two is a lot harder, which is about what do we do about the things that are already in risky places or built in risky ways. There are ways to mitigate that risk, depending on what the individual property is and what it's exposed to. And those are the conversations which we're not having enough of as a country, about what we do to mitigate the underlying risk to assets, which will help keep things insurable for more people, recognizing that it is already out of reach for some property owners.
If Robin is a former policy analyst, I'm a wannabe one. I spend my life kind of sitting between insurance, public policy and natural hazards. So, look, I agree with what Robin was saying. I just want to emphasise one thing. Look, we already do have a public scheme. It's called the EQC, right? So it's not foreign to New Zealand. But I think the devil's in the detail, and I think one of the things we need to be really clear is what is the problem we want to solve with it? Because if you're asking yourselves, why do people not have insurance? I mean, we talked about price, and there's just a basic income problem for some people. I was talking to someone earlier on. There's an inflation problem for everyone, right? Most of what's driven your premium increases over the last little while is the fact that the cost to rebuild your house has gone up a lot. So CPI runs at about, 2-3%. Construction inflation is usually double that. Last year, or 18 months ago, it was running at 18%, right? That, when we think about how we price, it is the hazard, the damage it's going to cause, and the value of your home, right? That's how we turn it into dollars, right? So when your home is becoming much, much more valuable in terms of a rebuild cost, your premiums are going up. So that affects everyone's premium. So we've got an inflation problem, which is actually all about the construction industry and about land use, right? So again, the price is a symptom of an underlying system. And then there's the issue around risk. So is it an acute risk? Like you're living in the river. Is it the fact that you've accumulated lots of risks? I'm living in the river and it liquefies and it has an earthquake. Or is it the fact that actually you have one of those uninsurable risks? All of those are reasons why people will not get or be able to have insurance. Some of that's people who are already insured who might fall out. Some people aren't even in the insurance market and face those things. So what is the problem we're trying to solve with a public scheme, right? Doesn't mean we shouldn't have one, and it might sound like a weird thing from an insurer to say, but I think we need to be really clear about what the problem is, because then you get to design this scheme well. And I think if you look at all the schemes around the world, every single one of them has good points and every single one of them has failed in certain respects. None of them are fit for purpose for New Zealand, but they all have features that could be beneficial for us. Depends on the problem we want to solve.
Any other panel comments on this? Over. Any audience comments? Me.
I suppose one comment, but it might also benefit other people. And I guess as a resident down here, I grew up down here and seeing how the beach changes over time. And I'm a landscape architect, so I know about climate change and resilience in environments. And I think I came home after being away for quite a long time, and outside Dad's place, our beach, I remember as a child, you used to step down, it was a 2 to 3 metre drop. Now it's 40 metres out, and I've measured it. And so when I went to get insurance, it said you're denied because of erosion. And then I actually contacted the company and said, here's a map, I've measured it. When we pay for insurance at 12 to 24 months at a time, this is how can this be considered erosion when there's a net effect of all the storms throughout the last 40 years is 40 metres of growth. So I think, we're a bit unfairly being punished in here in terms of, we're being labelled as eroding, you're going to wash away. But the reality is we're not seeing that yet. Yes, we might do it. And I think I'm quite hopeful with these climate adaptation plans coming through, because then we'll be able to put those markers out and say, well, if the dune erodes back to maybe the original level it was 20 years ago, then we need to be concerned. But at the moment, the trend is it's going the opposite direction to what we've been told it's going. So I think a lot of the community are... But anyway, so just to say, if you do contact your insurance company, I was successfully able to get insurance by proving that the fact that even though I'm labelled as eroding, there's no chance we're going to be eroded in the near future. Long term, 50, 100, 200 years, maybe, we don't know what's going to happen. But again, I think we shouldn't be penalised on what might happen in 200 years, this year, next year, the year after. So hopefully we can work on that.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to the next question. Bryce, you're popular. Does IAG have data on how widespread insurance retreat is in New Zealand to date? Thank you for your time and continuing to highlight government inaction. I'm not going to comment on that.
Insurance retreat. Short answer is no, because we only know what we know. We don't know, we don't have a view of the entire market, we only see the people we have. Now, does New Zealand need to understand that? Yes. Is it a gap that we need to fill in terms of our knowledge? Yes. There's two aspects to that. When you talk about insurance retreat, where is insurance unavailable? And my comment on that would be that different companies, again, will have different approaches to that. Our approach now through our brands is that not offering insurance is an absolute rarity. You can think of some cases like the 11 houses in the foreshore of Haumoana where the waves are kind of virtually in the lounge. They probably aren't going to get insurance, right? So it's some pretty obvious cases, very, very few, right? So that's what I'd say about that. But there are a lot of people in New Zealand who do not have insurance. There is not good data on that. Some data sources will say 97% of people, homes are insured, and some data sources will say 85% of homes are insured. That's a big margin of error. It's probably closer to something in the mid-80s, right? The question is, do we find that acceptable as a country, and what do we want to do about that? The other kind of aspect around insurance retreat is underinsurance. You're insured, but you may not be insured for all you need to be insured for. And again, measuring that is is even harder, because the denominator, what should you be insured for, is almost individual. I know people who would say, who don't insure their contents. There's a very, very smart, capable guy I know at the Treasury, does not insure his contents because he says, why would I? I earn enough. I don't need 3 dinner sets that I've got now. If it all goes tits up, I just need to buy a bed and a fridge. I mean, that's just the way he's wired, right? And so he's grossly underinsured for his contents, but that's a perfectly rational risk choice for him, right? What are we trying to achieve there? Is it to make sure you're housed? Are we there to ensure your tennis court gets replaced, or your pool, or the 5th garage? What is it? Every dollar? So the denominator gets very, very difficult. That's a hard thing to measure, but we don't understand that either well enough.
Any other panel comments? Over.
I think, underinsurance is often an affordability issue, and so is uninsurance. There is a difference between a property that cannot be insured because, as Bryce said, the waves are in the lounge, versus properties which are simply too expensive to insure for the incomes of the people living in them, and they're not making a choice like your friend at the Treasury. It's just not possible. And that this is an area where there could be better data, where it's something we're thinking about at the Commission about, is there an insight that we could offer on that in the next wee while.
Thank you. Anybody want the microphone? Go on. Right. The next question is moved. Does the insurance industry have a role to play in community relocations away from hazard zones? That is, as a type of build back better. Over.
I would reflect. So some of my colleagues have been down in Westport a couple of times in the last year or so, and we published a report recently of what the people of Westport told us. They have grappled with the increasing, particularly flood risks to their town. I'm sure many people in the room know Westport. It's surrounded by water on every side. And the community has come up with their own plan about, over time, moving parts of the town. They've got the plan, they've got general agreement to it, but there's the question of who would pay for that is the major unanswered question. So does the insurance sector have a role? Potentially, that's kind of up to the insurance sector. But this is one of the big questions when we're facing this, the increased natural hazards driven by climate change, is who pays for the big stuff? And I think probably anyone who's got something to lose is interested in that question.
Thank you.
Do we have a role? Yes. What is that role? Is the more important question. After the flooding in Westport a wee while ago, we did have a conversation with the councils and the local government minister and the government to say, we're going to spend a lot of money in this town, why don't we actually spend it helping people move? And the community wasn't ready. Right? They just weren't ready. They didn't have a plan. So the ability to kind of redirect your money for your claim is there, right? There's no kind of contractual barrier. If you want to take the money and build elsewhere, then that can be done. We're not going to stop you doing that. What else can we do? We can help work with the community to understand how we might respond to certain events, because it takes a while to move a community, but what happens if another event occurs partway through? How do you kind of accelerate what might be going on? How do you have optionality in that? So understanding how we're going to respond vis-a-vis that plan is another thing that we can help councils with. So there's a whole variety of things that insurers could do to support a relocation. It's figuring out a way to do it, because a lot of those conversations are quite difficult, they're quite commercially sensitive, and it's very easy if you're the only insurer in the town, which through an accident of history, IAG virtually is in Westport. But when there's a whole bunch of other insurers in town, that gets really difficult, right? Now, we've got to figure out a way to solve that. But yeah, do we have a role? Yes, it's probably not what you think. It probably isn't paying for it, but there's a whole bunch of other things we can do to support it.
And it's emotive.
Sorry?
And it's
Huge.
emotive, massively.
I remember 2 Bryce's comment that insurance covers the residual risk. So we can do all sorts of things to reduce risk. Often it requires collective action, and that's where I think the big sticking point is. But I think the role that insurance is playing in this is being honest about the residual risks with different pathways that we choose. And the data that has been collected and the professional expertise and the role of competition amongst insurance brokers means, I think, on the whole, we can trust the pricing decisions that insurance companies are making and then look for alternative pathways individually and collectively that will reduce those residual risks in a way that compensates us for the costs of the transition.
Thank you. Robin? Or
I think the only thing I'd add is, to Bryce's point, it really, and to the point someone in the audience made about this it being very emotive, that's very true. And in the immediate aftermath of a major storm which affects people's lives, that's not the right time to make a long-term plan. The right time to make a long-term plan is before disaster strikes. Yeah.
okay. Anybody in the audience, or can we go to the next question? Nettie, are you keeping? Oh no, there's all right, a clock here.
The trouble as I see it with that scheme is that, you know, we're expected to disrupt our total life for something that might happen 25 years on and we're not even on the planet. You know, am I putting that clearly?
Yes.
You know, if you're doing it before a disaster strikes, you know, 25 years to 50 years, you know, the disaster might happen, but, you know, we're going to be long gone and we're just giving up our lifestyle for expected generations to come. Perhaps I'm sounding a bit selfish here, but I think that's how we feel. You know, something might happen in 50 to 100 years, so we've got to do it now because it's easier. Sorry, I just don't feel comfortable.
Okay, no. All good.
Yeah, I apologize if I could have expressed myself differently. I was not trying to suggest any kind of mandatory or, you know, planning. What I'm trying to say is that for plans to work, they need to have everybody's buy-in and everybody around the table as they're being developed, so that a community can sit down together and say, what might we be facing? When might it happen? And what do we want to do about it? And in many communities, that will not be moving. That might be investing in a different kind of flood protection system. Or, you know, there are lots of other options. Moving a community is one extreme, and it's not what's needed in most communities. But the key thing there is that you need the time to work through that as an affected community without anyone telling you what the answer is, but with good information about what might happen and what you could do about it. So then you can choose as a community what you want to do.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. Sorry. You say about stopping building in risky places. What about the conversation on building in the red zone? Some are liable to flooding. Is this wise? over.
The reality about place is that it is place-based. There's no general answer to that question. And we are living in a world where we are talking about possibilities, probabilities, risks that affect people in different ways depending on whether they're young or retired, depending on all sorts of things. And one of the great strengths of the insurance system is that it allows all of those factors to be considered by the individual household sitting down, do I want to sign this assurance agreement or not? That's a very, very powerful mechanism. So we certainly don't want to give away that mechanism in whatever solutions we find. Yet there remains this overwhelming change in our lives that is happening to us whether we foresaw it or not. That means doing nothing has its own risks. And so the purpose of evenings like this is to come together to share from our different perspectives and our different expertise stimuluses to the imagination about pathways that we might create together. And it won't be the people in this room, but it'll be people like us in rooms like this all across the country trying to grapple with the increasing severity and intensity and frequency of these big storm events. You know, Auckland got inundated twice in 1 month, and I've never known anything like that in 66 years of life. So things are changing, and we are trying to find collective and individual ways that does not abandon the power of insurance that has done great things for so many people, including respecting all of that diversity, but at the same time recognising that we've got to come together as a community to find solutions for some of the big, big problems.
Just building on that, one I was thinking, should you rebuild in the red zone? It depends. How's that for a great answer? Yeah, I could be an economist. That's great. Because remember, it's about the risk, and it's about risk appetite, right? So let's remember, and part of the red zone was when it was developed, it was denied by the council, it was overturned by the Environment Court, and it was developed, and then it got liquefied, and then they pulled it down, and now we're questioning, should we put it back? Right, so what we need to do is have, hopefully now, a much better understanding of the risk, take into account a better understanding of possible future risks there. That will have a degree of uncertainty. At one extreme, I think the stat's right, last time there was this much carbon in the atmosphere, the oceans were about 5 or 6 metres higher. Well, that's Christchurch gone, isn't it? Right? So at one end, you've got no Christchurch. So what does that mean? Right? So what is your risk appetite? What do you want to do about the uncertainty? And that is exactly what Paul's saying. That is a conversation for a community to have about what are we prepared to accept or not accept, right? And that's about how do we make these decisions, because at the moment these decisions get made somewhere within councils, somewhere within government departments about what we think is an acceptable and unacceptable risk. Get involved, have a view.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And the planning system is under reform, right? The government is reforming the Resource Management Act wholesale. Then now is a really good time to get involved if you have a view on who should be making what decisions where.
Within that, there's an instrument called the National Policy Statement for Natural Hazards, and it tries to advise councils about how they should think about natural hazard risk. How do you assess it? What's a significant risk? What should you do when you find a significant risk, et cetera, et cetera. My opinion is that needs a lot more work to provide stronger guidance. But that is the instrument, or the application of that instrument is the way in which communities get to have a view about the acceptability of risk, right?
Okay, can we go for Karina first, and then...
I just want to make a comment about the hazard planning and the risk assessments and that, and I welcome your comment saying it needs a lot more work. I think that's what a lot of communities are experiencing, is the catastrophising of these events. So instead of, as Robin rightly said, many communities will not be moved. There'll be an adaptation, which will be much cheaper than moving people, and much better for well-being. But I think what people are seeing on the sharp end in communities is the catastrophising of everybody's going to go, and so that's where I think, and councils often pointing to the risk management matrix that's in there and part of that. So how can we do more with what Robin's talking about, is encouraging our councils to look at adaptation, and that's again where you're talking about who spends the money where, is looking at adaptation as the primary response, because then I think communities would feel more comfortable being involved. I think they, when it's catastrophised for them, it's a deer in headlights and they don't want to become involved. So how do we change that perception of the risk profile to allow communities to actually feel they have a future?
So, how long have we got? Because
we have about 5 minutes.
Because this is a really big question in Aotearoa New Zealand now. What is the role of local government in our national strategic planning? And at the moment, the council is being consumed by an instruction from the government to reach out to their neighbours to come back with amalgamation plans. And a larger council covering most of Canterbury, what do you think its appetite will be for helping the community of New Brighton think about different pathways with coastal storm surges? And the history of the last 20 years has been of more and more responsibilities being placed on local government with no increase in their funding base. They are under enormous pressure through the whole country. I think Christchurch is better placed than most, to be honest. That Christchurch seems like a nice size for collecting enough revenue to address key strategic decisions with the expertise that you require. But goodness knows how they're getting on in those 3 district councils on the West Coast. And this is the difficulty, is that the most effective solution to a problem may be coming together at the local government level to defend ourselves against climate change. But because we don't have the mechanisms to achieve that effectively, one by one households retreat because it's becoming the risk too high, and we end up drifting into a situation where things have not turned out well. And so every opportunity, say we should be investing more in local government because our solutions are communal. There's a limit to what we can do as individuals, and we should be trusting councils to do more with our interests at heart, in partnership with us. You know, I'm not naive about the ability of councils to muck things up when they don't listen to community, but we have community boards who are doing good things. We have good people working in council, good people being elected to council, and we are hamstringing them because of this ideological commitment, keeping rates at a level that doesn't allow us to invest in a better future for ourselves.
Can I just say one thing? I agree with you around catastrophising. I think my observation would be 10 years ago we weren't having these conversations, now we are. Is it moving fast enough? Probably not. We're probably behind the 8 ball, but we're moving, right? And I think where we've got ourselves too, and I think where decision makers have got to is they now know enough to be worried. They know enough to be scared. They know enough to go, oh, I don't want to touch that. We don't know enough to know what to do yet, right? So the task now is to find the ways to break through that and be really clear about what the problem is. What are we wanting to achieve? How do we do that, right? So, you know, I think there was a stat earlier on 400,000 homes in flood zones, and I think your little chart was actually reasonably quite accurate, actually. You know, 15% of homes in New Zealand are in floodplains. I would say 90% of them have nothing to worry about, right? Because when it comes to a flood, it's all about depth, fundamentally, and most of them aren't going to be very deep. There's about 1% that you need to worry, and there's a fraction of a percent that can't live there, right? So if we knew that our riverine flooding problem was not a 400,000 home problem, but a 4,000 home problem, that allows us to start thinking about a solution a lot more easily, right? We don't go, holy shit, how are we going to deal with that? It becomes manageable. So I think we need to find ways to push through the fact that, and just recognise where we are on our journey.
Robin?
Yeah, I'd say adaptation is inherently local. You know, and at a national level, we can talk about what's coming and what to do about it, but the action that sticks and lasts will be driven at a local level. It needs good information. It needs open-minded people working through that and looking at options. And it does need, you know, someone to pay for whatever options are chosen. But where it works, it's because local people are in control of their community and their destiny, not because they're told they have to do one thing or another thing.
Thank you, everybody. That was very interesting. The time is 9:46, so we have very little time left. I've asked Rachel whether she would like to say something. Over.
Yeah, also just a question. Yeah. Yeah, just to support what Robin's just said and the speakers, thank you. What I'm hearing is that there aren't any really clear solutions, that this is very difficult territory, that we want solutions that are fair and equitable and don't leave anyone behind, and that we really need to involve communities in those discussions. So I kind of feel this really lends itself to something like a citizen jury type approach, where we have a diverse range of our community, potentially at a local level or national level, but working closely with insurance companies, the government, policymakers, local government obviously, and researchers, but very much led by the community, or community being very central to that rather than being led by others, to see if we can find some answers together, because there aren't easy answers, but we do need to figure this out. It's very important. And communities, we don't want to be done to. Nothing about us without us. And so I just feel like the process of how we get through this needs to be a collective one, not just top down. So that would be my reflection and request.
Can I add one observation to what you're saying? And this is going to sound potentially awful, but I think we need also to think about what are we prepared to give up. We often say, well, what do we want to achieve? What outcomes do we want? Well, and we often perhaps kid ourselves that those outcomes are all going to be, you know, sun-dappled uplands. The reality is, you know, take the example of the earthquakes here. I think the PM at the time basically said no one's going to lose out. Complete bollocks. People are going to lose out. People are going to get hurt. People are going to lose a lot. Some people made out like gangsters actually also, right? So there are different outcomes, and I think part of the reality of this is that we have to think about not only what do we want to achieve, but what is the minimum viable thing that we can find acceptable, because it's much easier for us to kind of work to that, unfortunately. So we need to be prepared to give up some things to achieve the minimum. And I think Japan has a very interesting model for that. They've kind of gone through and figured out what are the things that we just can't live with occurring. People isolated for a long time, loss of fuel, you know, loss of access to medical supplies, large-scale, you know, they've gone through, they've thought about that, and that's what they absolutely designed. We have to achieve that. So I think we are all going to have to give up something, and we just got to accept that, because it's not going to be great. But once we accept that, that also needs to be on the table so we can actually make informed choices.
You are an economist.
I'm an economist and a frustrated policy analyst.
Okay. Robin, any closing comments?
I know I started very bleakly at the beginning of the evening, but in giving up things, we can also create things. And I'm thinking about a process they're going through on the North Shore of Auckland at the moment, where there's a community who, well, there's a flood issue, and part of the solution there involves how do they return a natural wetland, which is used as a golf course, to soak up the water so it doesn't flood homes and shops anymore. And they have had a citizens' assembly approach, and they are making some progress with that by getting, you know, representatives from all different people in the community together and saying, look, what is the future of this piece of land, which is currently a golf course? How do we make that work in a way that drains the water away from your houses and away from your businesses, and still has some utility in terms of park space, green space, some golf, you know, do we move from 18 to 9 holes, you know, and that's a process where they're going through up there. So that you can create a new park that floods. In some places, that's the answer.
Let me just thank you, Simon, for the work you are doing and bringing us together on an evening like this. I mean, you can see there are lots of people who have come with questions, and an organisation like this in the heart of the community, ensuring that voices are heard, is a real asset. So thank you for the role that you have played in bringing us together this evening.
Thank you, it's very kind. I'd like us to thank the panel. You've given up an evening, but it's been a very useful evening. Thank you very much. And I think I should add, it's a team thing. I might be the funny face at the front, but there's many other people. I should just outline what will happen to these questions. There's a lot of questions we haven't answered. What we will do, and it will take a while, is our Eclipse friends will get the film together and make sure the voices can be heard. We'll make sure that we edit out any coughing fits. We won't edit out anything else. And meanwhile, we will take all of the questions on here. Nettie, how many are there? God help me, yes. A few then. Okay, and we will put the film of this evening on our website. And for those of you that know our website, you know it's really not good. We have a new website, which hopefully will be active in the next few days. So we'll put all of the recordings of these evenings on there, including this one. And these questions, we will work out answers, and we'll actually peer review them. So it won't be just me, it'll be 2 or 3 other people who look at it. And they'll go up alongside those on the website. Anyway, finally, thank you to you guys for being interested and coming out. If you didn't, this wouldn't work. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Okay, it's time to go home.